The orchestral, or art film version of BTS's Black Swan is a beautiful, striking, and unique track which has no analog elsewhere in K-pop. Related to the advocacy BTS was doing at the time as cultural ambassadors, Black Swan synthesizes the diverse art forms of classical orchestration, pop music, and modern dancing into a vessel for communicating the internal struggle an artist faces with maintaining love for their art. This release features many distinctive creative choices: an intricate string arrangement played by actual musicians, combining classical music with pop, gorgeous modern dancing, and stylistically auto-tuned vocals. But threaded through all these elements is a commitment towards spreading a particular message. The music video begins with a quote from the legendary modern dancer Martha Graham, which reads, "A dancer dies twice, once when they stop dancing, and this first death is the more painful." Black Swan explores the relationship between an artist and their art, telling the story of an artist losing and ultimately regaining the love for their craft. This message is not only conveyed through the lyrics, but in the arrangement of the track itself, namely in its unique use of structure. Allow me to digress for a brief moment to talk a little bit about pop structure. I promise it'll be relevant later, just stick with me for a minute. If I had to describe the flow of a typical K-pop song in terms of the building and release of energy, it looks something like this. The structure of K-pop songs is such that the lower energy verses and pre-choruses build up to the choruses, the high energy point which the audience remembers the best. Because there's 3 choruses, there are 3 distinct high points of the song towards which the momentum leads. On the other hand, if I had to describe Black Swan in terms of how its momentum flows, it looks something like this. Instead of 3 evenly spaced high points in the track, Black Swan slowly builds in intensity and complexity throughout its entire runtime, leading towards a single release in energy at the very end. To me, this looks kind of like the Freytag's pyramid we've all been traumatized with in English class, so I thought that I might use this as a tool to describe Black Swan as a whole. This musical structure is interconnected with the visual messaging from the dancers and the thematic message of the lyrics. The string arrangement, dance, and lyrics all follow the rise and fall of this story arc in perfect harmony. In this video, I've divided Black Swan into the exposition, rising action, and the climax and falling action, just as you would in any other story. I'll use this organization to describe the dynamic and complex development of the arrangement and explore how the structure of a song can be used to convey the story of an artist struggling to maintain love with the art they create. Looking at Black Swan from a larger perspective, I feel that the introduction and the first verse can be seen as analogous to the exposition of a story. These sections introduce the hopeful and precocious creative explorations of a fledgling artist and lay the groundwork upon which the future conflict will arise. Let's take a listen. The video begins in the diegesis of the dancers, with the loud, echoey footsteps reverberating off the surfaces of the garage and the main dancer hitting their arms against their back as if clumsily sprouting wings. The echoing silence is eerie and isolating. Then, suddenly, the music begins with flutting strings panning back and forth. The heavy vibrato adds to this effect, lending the section an uncertain and tumultuous character. This represents a proverbial hatching. From a resounding silence, the artist first begins to explore their form and flex their creative wings. The first verse goes on to describe the next steps of the artist's first creative endeavors. The first verse fills out the arrangement of the introduction, bringing in the repeated plucked string motif, lush phrases from the violins and cellos, and rhythmic structure from the guitar. The vocals are doused in auto-tune and lush harmonies are interspersed throughout to lend the rap more tonality, complementing the string arrangement beneath it. The section is musically relaxed, calm, and stable. The artist is experiencing the joys of first creating art in a safe, sanitized environment. where he is physically manipulated by the dancers in black. They hold his neck and twirl him, and raise him up into the air. But ultimately, the main dancer is not guiding his own movements. The dancers in black perhaps represent the pressures and expectations of the industry, modern trends, and outside expectations which guide the formation of art. As the artist develops, this type of mechanical art on autopilot will become emotionally unfulfilling. Now that the inciting conflict has been introduced, we have reached the rising action. The first pre-chorus adds runs in the upper strings to match the increased intensity of the top line, creating feelings of discomfort and intent. The artist begins to push the boundaries of their creative space. Now, when the backup dancers manipulate him, he collapses, no longer empowered, but constrained. This disconnect would be caused by the industry expectations and financial pressures of being an artist, which can work against creativity and inspiration. The chorus brings a musical intensity signifying metamorphosis, conflict, and movement. The strings outline a strong beat under an insistent and intense melody in the vocals. Similar to a movie soundtrack, the chorus is sweeping and emotional. The dancer is reaching outward, attempting to escape the box, but being pulled back by the dancers in black. The artist is exploring the self and trying to escape the suffocating creative space, but to no avail. In the post-chorus, once the ascending melody reaches its height, the strings break out into quick descending phrases, the fastest element in the track thus far. This is the sound of falling, or descent. The dancer is being pulled back and having to fail to escape his constraints, spastically manipulating his limbs. The artist is unsure of how to create, paralyzed in uncertainty. In a sort of writer's block, the artist despises what they create but has no idea how to move forward. In the second verse, the dancer begins escaping their constraints. The dancer oscillates between being controlled by the black dancers and performing soloistic dance off to the side, as the high strings engage in a turbulent call and response of sweeping phrases. The artist has gone deep into the self, explicitly rejecting their previous creative processes and spaces. To reference the lyrics, "I'll never get dragged away again. Inside, I saw myself." The second pre-chorus is fraught with intensity and conflict. Insistent drums sound on each beat under intense rhythmic figures from the high strings, signaling forward movement and drive. The dancer is now running away, explicitly fighting whenever the black dancers get close. Shedding any reliance or connection to industry expectation and their previous methods of creating art, the artist immerses themselves in self-reflection and self-discovery. This introspective reflection to redefine the artist comes with risk, but eyes wide open into my forest, nothing can devour me. I shout out with ferocity. The track comes to a sudden halt as the dancer escapes their constraints. the strings wind down, rattling their bows against the strings to bring the momentum of the song to a screeching stop. Once the strings dissipate, diegetic sound returns, and with it, a resounding, echoey silence. The dancer is scarily alone. Having rejected the constraints of producing commercial art, the artist is uncertain of their new path. This calls back to the beginning of the song, when the artist was a fledgling attempting to learn how to fly. The artist has deconstructed their relationship with their art, and now must forge a new one. We have reached the central conflict of Black Swan. After agonizing seconds of drawn-out silence, the track suddenly returns with full force and intensity. The descending line from the strings over the long phrases in the bass and the reverby drum hits on each beat are reminiscent of a sweeping, dramatic movie score. As the section progresses, the strings begin bowing on every eighth note with a solo virtuoso violin riffing over it. The section is rhythmically stable and driven, a sort of coming of age. The dancer has found their power and individuality over their constraints. The relationship has reversed. Now, the dancers in black follow and complement the will of the main dancer. The artist has achieved self-actualization, individuality, and artistic power. They have found a place which allows them to love the art they create. As the track winds down in the outro, the music is permeated with a sense of beauty, control, and creative freedom. The main riff, which has so far been plucked, is now bowed, passed from the solo violin down the string voices. The final movement is of the dancer flying upwards, symbolizing a continuous striving towards creating beautiful art that expresses the self. However, as the screen fades to black, the song never resolves into its final note. Despite the victory of the artist over their inner demons, the ending is still uncertain. This represents that to be an artist is to face the continuous struggle of satisfying your creative desires and continuing to improve, while navigating societal pressures, judgment, and trends. Even after all the self-reflection the artist has undergone through the progression of this track, they have not found definitive victory, but an internal struggle. So that concludes the story of Black Swan. The first time I listened to this track, I was so mesmerized that I rewatched it like at least 10 times, which never happens to me. To me, this release shows a respect for art in all its forms, combining pop, classical music, and modern dance. From a thematic perspective, I'm not sure anything in K-pop has or ever will top this. And it's a real shame that it's not on any music streaming platforms. I will never forgive you, Hybe. So let me know your thoughts about Black Swan in the comments and how you interpreted its message. With that, Hideout.